History, history. Can you see, little boy, what you mean to me? Can you see how sweet our love has long grown to be? It's time to see the happiness I feel inside of me. Knowing one thing, darling, this love will always be two lovers. History, ain't that two lovers? History.
Welcome to episode 26 of the History Boys Abroad. My name is Tony. Tonight I'm going to be joined by two fellow History Boys Abroad. One is in Bogota, the other is in Dumbarton, is that correct?
Yes, the People's Republic.
The People's Republic of Dumbarton. So I'm joined by Liam in Dumbarton and
Hello.
Gary, the numero uno papito de Bogota. How are you doing, Gary? How are you doing, Liam?
I'm well.
I'm doing a bit better than I was last week, so yeah, everything's looking a bit more rosy. Hoops are about to be crowned champions. What more could you ask for?
So, we're here to talk about non-football matters. We're here to talk about stadium proposals involving the outskirts of Glasgow. The Cambuslang Stadium proposal. Now, let me ask you this. I know you've read a book on this, Gary, so I'll ask this to Liam, then I'll come back to you, Gary. What did you know before the research, Liam?
I can recall, from back in the day, about all the chat and how it all unravelled. I can also remember the whole aftermath of it and the sack the board chants and things like that. So, but I did obviously have to look things up to get the actual definitive information. But no, I do remember some of it from, I think, what age would that have been, 92, 12? No, 10?
Not 10.
Aye.
Same age as me.
Aye.
So, did you have a season ticket?
I did have a season ticket way back then. I'm sure the way the season ticket worked was that I don't actually think you actually get designated a section of the ground. I think you actually just hand over your ticket and you went into that area. Sure, because I can always remember going into the jungle.
It was a stand.
But
You're terracing.
the terracing, because they never get seated until the year after
McCann.
this, 93. 93, wasn't it?
Right, okay, we're kind of getting into it already. But Gary, let me ask you, you've read a book on this. Tell us about the book, you brought that up today.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned it because I've just forgot the name. I think it's called Sack the Board. It was a book, it was brought out in late April 1994. From just doing a bit of the research, I saw that. So it was brought out just after kind of the old board had been taken over, so it had been built up, and it kind of goes through, basically in a chronological order. It goes through the kind of battle to get the old board out, starting from Dempsey getting onto the board and then getting thrown off, and it just kind of goes through it, and it's a tour de force of just complete and utter incompetency from you see day in day out exactly why Celtic fans would have been tearing their hair out every single day. That board were just kind of going from one omni shambles to the next. So it's a very good book in that sense. It's very good to read now you see where Celtic are, and it kind of gives you a bit of an introspection as to where they might have actually been had we not been successful in getting these people out.
How old were you in 1992, Gary?
I'd have been four at that point. Okay. I think I went to my first game around about that time as well, and I do remember being in the old Celtic Park. I remember twice. I remember the first game I went to, I'm pretty sure, playing at Aberdeen. And I don't remember, when you're that age, you kind of remember the stadium and stuff like that. You remember nothing of the game. I just remember I was sitting on one of the little the benches or little fences, and I was there with my dad, my two brothers. My two brothers were sitting on the fence as well. The only memory I have of it is a police officer come over and saying to my brothers, "You two get off." I could have stayed on because my dad was holding me, and that's literally the first and only memory I have of, or one of the only memories I have of the old stadium.
Fuck the police. So, before we start talking about the actual proposal and what that entailed, we want to kind of talk about who was involved with Celtic at this time. Now, there's going to be people that we miss here because there were quite a lot of people involved. But let's just start with like the protagonist, who was the chairman, Kevin Kelly. One of the things that I noticed from the photo of the Celtic View that we're going to talk about, because this was all unveiled pre-internet, Celtic View was, something that people tended to use for their Celtic knowledge and their Celtic information. So it was revealed in the Celtic View. And if you haven't seen the picture, and it's a famous picture of Kevin Kelly, and he's standing in the middle of this green, which was the new site, and it's like a come to daddy style picture, and he's just standing there looking like a bumbling uncle, photobombing your photo. So he was the guy that represented Celtic. He was the chairman. He was part of the Kelly family, the dynasty that ran Celtic Football Club for decades. His sidekick was Michael Kelly, and I think they were cousins. They were not brothers or father. It's not a paternal relationship. They were cousins. He actually was quite an interesting guy. He was the Lord Provost of Glasgow, who took the chair of the Lord Provost. I don't know what they call them, but they take a chair anyway. And he began that role in 1980. I think it was 1980, which was the year of the Real Madrid ties from History Bhoys Abroad 24, which we released a couple of weeks ago or whatever. And this was the year of the riot and the Scottish Cup final. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's seen the footage and whatnot. So yeah, I'm familiar with it.
Aye, so he was the guy that was sort of in charge to set out the investigation to change the way football in Scotland has been ever since, I guess. So he was directly involved with that. But again, he's part of this family, this dynasty that have been woven into Celtic's history since the very, very, very beginning. His name is Michael Kelly. He was also the guy that gave Scotland, or Glasgow, that I think it was the Garden Festival. Was it called the Garden Festival, Liam? You remember this from 1988?
It was the Glasgow Garden Festival. Was the Coca-Cola roller coaster in it.
That's it. Was it not like the tagline was Glasgow Smiles Better? Glasgow Smiles Better.
That was because that was for was it all the City of Culture, and that was the tagline from that.
Right.
I don't know if the Garden Festival had a tagline, but that was the tagline for the City of Culture with the wee Mr. Happy.
That's what I meant, not the Garden Festival. The late 80s and early 90s kind of merged into one for me. And I'm the same age as Julian. I was about 8 or 9 when this was all this incident I'm talking about. But anyway, so yeah, he was the guy that sort of instigated the Glasgow Smiles Better campaign. The next guy that's involved is a guy called Terry Cassidy, who's a chief executive, who was kind of a bit part player. To give you an idea of the sort of person he was, there's a quote from Billy McNeil that I found. He said, well, Billy McNeil was the manager in charge of Celtic at this time. He was in from the late 80s until 1991, I think, his second stint as manager of Celtic. Billy McNeil had this to say: "In my dealings with Cassidy, I found him thoroughly unpleasant, untrustworthy, overbearing, an offensive individual," he says. So, if it's coming for Billy, you kind of have to think this guy's a bit of a snake. So it turns out he did have a lot of trouble with Celtic, and eventually he got sacked, I think, and then he then took Celtic to court to get money, and then he was up against the Kellys. And the next guy was a guy called David Smith, who was a non-executive director. My understanding was that he had a lot of financial experience, and he was described by the Kellys as having international pedigree, and we should be lucky. He actually said this, that he has an international pedigree, and Celtic should be lucky to have him. Celtic are very lucky to have him. This was said on a Question Time talk show that Archie McPherson ran on a Monday evening, all about sport, which I'll get to later on. He also said it was the boldest and most imaginative appointment ever made to a Celtic board. Take from that what you will. And he said his role, basically David Smith's role, was to try and drum up money for the stadium, and he began in February 1992. And then the next guy I want to mention, there's going to be more people, but was Brian Dempsey. Everyone knows Brian Dempsey as the guy that stood on the steps and announced the Rebels have won. He stood alongside Jim White, but more importantly, he stood alongside Fergus McCann, and he was the guy to relay the message. He was involved with the initial stadium plans to relocate, and he also proposed his own stadium plans to move to Rob Royston. Are you familiar with that?
I vaguely recall, obviously, Dempsey having this proposal, but I can't really remember the ins and outs of the Rob Royston one. I just always remember the Cambuslang one because it's so infamous.
Yeah. Gary, have you heard of the Rob Royston plans?
I'd got them mixed up in my head. So I thought that Cambuslang was also from Dempsey before, and now I know that it was that was actually a different plan as well. So no, I didn't know too much about it. I knew Dempsey had a kind of, and from what I've seen from certain comments on boards and whatever, that a lot of people kind of was quite cynical about it, and they thought that his main aim for that was not to help out Celtic, but was to help out himself in terms of the value of the land. How true that is, I have no idea, but that's about as far as I know.
Yeah, essentially, he proposed Celtic move the stadium to Rob Royston, to land which he actually owned, and he was trying to flip the land or something like that to try and make some money from it. So he proposed that, but then things went a bit sour with him at Celtic, and then he was shunned out, and then he joins the Rebels, and then the rest was history. But we're going to start talking now about the April of 1992, more specifically April 15th, 1992, Celtic View, edition 1167, it cost 70 pence. The headline, Paradise Found, and Chairman Kelly said, "For far too long, the Celtic board has faced a non-stop barrage of ill-considered criticism from uninformed people of dubious motivation. Our goal has always been simple, giving the very best to the most faithful fans in the world. We promised that they would be told of our plans first, and we are now delivering on that promise. There will be further announcements as the plan develops in stages, with planning permission and funding of the scheme, the main areas in which we have to progress." So this is an excerpt from the April 15th, 1992 Celtic View. What do you think of that? What does that say to you, Gary?
Well, I think you need to put it in context. When you look at where they were, I mean, basically from the kind of mid to late 80s, kind of when Souness came in at Rangers, that's when you kind of started seeing the fans becoming very vocal. And it started at the 87-88 season. They started and it kind of goes out of the culture of football at the time when they started the football fanzines with not the View and stuff like that, because people just didn't really trust the board, and I think they've been spouting off stuff for far too long. And I think this would have been, especially when you consider the context, have been basically, apart from the 88 centenary season, 5 continuous years basically of underinvestment, 5 years of being badly run, and it's beginning to show on the park. And I think the fan, so they kind of had to give some sort of sop. It just, obviously, with hindsight's 2020, but I think this is one thing where you can actually look at hindsight and it's not much different from the reactions of the time. And I don't think many real Celtic fans bought this, and I think it was very much a sop to a kind of dying board, and they were just a sop to the fans from a dying board, and they were just trying to be clever, trying to get cheap PR, and it just kind of sums up how amateur they actually were.
Yeah, to me, it seemed like the last roll of a dice being rolled by guys that knew their time was coming to an end. They were so entrenched in Celtic, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but when you're entrenched in Celtic and they're actually very blind to what the real fans want, it became a problem. So Liam, I want you to tell us a little bit about this initial stadium proposal from April 15th in 1992. What have you got?
Well, I'm going to go with what the Celtic View actually proposed, and just consider what they were pitching and what obviously they were hoping the fans were going to perceive as what they classified as Paradise Found. Initially, they were proposing it was going to be a 52,000 all-seater stadium, which was obviously going to have to coincide with the Taylor report anyway, where every stadium was going to be all-seated. Yep. So that was obviously something that was going to happen no matter what the situation was. But minus that fact, everything else that was kind of proposed seemed just a pipe dream, or moonbeams, if you want to put it that way. On their proposal, they had things like a 8-screen cinema complex, a 30-lane 10-pin bowling alley, VIP parking, like a permanent stage, like on the stage, like on the grounds of the stadium for, well, obviously performances. But it's just everything that, when you're looking at it now, is obviously very unbelievable that they perceived that they could get away with proposing something like this, and people would never question exactly what was going to be the outcome of it.
Can I just ask you, do you think that says a lot about what the board thought about the fans? Do you think that's an indication?
I'd probably say, well, yes. The fact that for the period that Rangers were obviously in power at this point, and how they were dominating not just Celtic but everybody in Scottish football, that the fans had probably been that demoralised so much that I guess just any glimmer of hope was something that they wanted to see. Yeah,
I think it points to like the board thinking that the Celtic support are gullible and naive to sort of throw them a bone, like just rush this thing out. It seemed to me like a very, very rushed proposal. I'm being quite generous calling it a proposal because we'll talk about some of the language used in a minute. But Gary, would you agree with that the board clearly had some disdain for the support by rushing out this hyperbolic piece of rubbish, which we now, and you, as you say, we now know it was moonbeams, but even then it clearly was moonbeams.
Yeah, and just to go back to what you'd said, like you said it was like I think you thought it was the act of a kind of dying board, and they kind of knew their time was up. I would disagree with that. I actually genuinely think that they were that amateurish that they thought that these things would actually work. Kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. They thought that, well, if we just begin to think big and act big, then we'll end up being big. And honestly, from what I can see, and even I listened to a clip from the Celtic Underground podcast. Was it with Michael Kelly? I believe it was with. Yeah. Yes. And even to this day, just the stuff he spouted, I was getting pissed off listening to it because I was just like, are you serious? Do you still believe? He was
adamant, wasn't he?
And you just think, if you're this deluded 20 years after the fact, then how bad would you have been when you were there, when you were entrenched and so on? I generally think they didn't have a clue to the level of discontent and the level of... So yeah, I think even them treating the kind of Celtic supporters idiots is actually an understatement. I reckon they a genuine disrespect, perhaps even like a kind of elitist... they're just the common fucking idiots, and we know best. We've been running it for ages. Yeah, and even just, I'm looking through the list of things now. It just seems such a PR stunt. You think of moonbeams. Obviously, is a kind of used as a word of our times because of the Huns, but it's exactly that. It's just like, what different little tidbits can we put in here that will create a headline? And it's just little facts that people can just pass off, and you can imagine kids going into school and just immediately going, we're going to get a cinema and it's going to be a bowling alley, and it's just all this stuff, and you're just like, you suddenly get fucking two pennies to rub together, and I would go as far to call them completely deluded at this point.
Yeah. So I'll talk you through some of the facts, then I'm going to hit you with some of the language used. Apparently, for the stadium proposal, they looked at 15 sites. I think the initial plan was to raise £26 million, and they said that it would provide 2,000 jobs for Glasgow. Now, Cambuslangs technically not in Glasgow, so it's kind of splitting hairs, but still. Also, the contingency plan that they had for the Cambuslang was basically to renovate Celtic Park, which we know with hindsight that's what happened anyway because Fergus came in. But some of the language that was used in this article, I'm going to read it to you now, and it's fucking cringeworthy. So, world's best stadium for world's best fans, unstinting, experts, refreshing manner, extensive studies, self-sustaining, geotechnique studies. Now, geotechnic studies is the physical, I think it's the study of the property of soil. Is this your line of work, by the way? I just realised.
It's a study of soils to show how, the way the earth works would determine how much, obviously, things like piling and reinforcements, or the way how much moisture and or how dry the soil is. So therefore, how you actually kind of counteract what is there to make the ground solid. There you go. That's it.
That's it. Dropping knowledge bombs again. Here we go. I'll continue. Dream of a stadium and enormous credit. These are the sort of words that they were using, and it's normally the sort of language it's used to dress up something that's pretending to be something else. To let you know where Celtic were in the league. This is the season, 1991-1992. Celtic finished third behind Hearts and Rangers. Celtic finished on 62 points, Hearts 63 and Rangers on 72. The squad for that season was Bonner, Boyd, Cascarino, Collins, Coyne, Craney, Jakinovsky, Fulton, Galloway, Gillespie, Grant, McInally, Breathe, McStay, Marshall, Miller, Morris, Mowbray, Nicholas, O'Neill, Rogan, Smith, Walker, Dovcek, White. Now, this is pretty much the only football chat you're going to hear in this podcast. So if you've got this far and you're expecting more football chat on this episode, then unfortunately this is kind of it. One more thing, Liam Brady was in charge. This is the year of the Neuchâtel game, Xamax, when Celtic got embarrassed by Neuchâtel Xamax and got put out. And the season overall was not very good. Liam Brady comes in, a guy who was the first manager of Celtic, I think, that never had any connection with the club, but he was an Irish guy, and I think he must have understood Celtic. But when I look at the results, win, loss, draw, loss, win, draw, it's like binary. It's just like binary results. There's no real consistency apart from when we get to January, we go on a run of about 10 games in the league where we win every single game, which is when we're actually right up to April. In fact, the game before the Celtic View was released on April the 15th, we stopped winning. We went on about 10-game win, then we drew the game before. It's obviously not got anything to do with the actual stadium proposals, but there you go. So, do you actually think that these proposals were real? Like, do you think these even existed, or was it just a fabrication of the board?
I would say there was probably a fabrication of the board, but obviously there has to be some kind of element of realness to get the architect's impression that was in the Celtic View. But just literally the costs alone was what makes me think it was just a fabrication of the board. Like how you touched on earlier on, the initial 26 million, but it was an overall cost of 100 million they were looking for to rebuild this whole stadium in Cambuslang. Like, they couldn't even generate 26 million, let alone 100 million. So I feel as though that it really was just like the board's just pipe dream, really. But
yeah, Gary, what do you think? Do you think it was a real thing, or do you think they just like got an architect to knock up a quick draft on Microsoft Paint or whatever the fuck it was, and then knock that out as if to say, yeah, this is really happening?
I think it would have been something sketched out. Again, just from the research that I've done and the changes that happened in this whole process, like just things getting dropped and the capacity's changing and so on, which we'll delve into later. I think they have done. I think it might have been Super Stadia, the company that said they're going to build it and stuff like that. The Pat Nally guy, who I'm sure we'll speak about in a bit, he's a bit of a spiv. And he reminds me a bit of the monorail guy in The Simpsons, and just you can imagine him just coming in with these sketches and just you don't need to worry about the fucking details. Just look, this is what's going to happen. You're going to have this. You're going to have a bowling alley and all that as well. I think it just rang amateurism throughout, and it just sums them up really. It's just like we'll sketch it out, say we're going to build it, and we'll work out the details later.
Yeah, just to clarify there, the monorail guy is Craig White. We're all clear on that. Yeah. So, some of the chat from the time, because I watched this, the name of the programme escapes me. I'm just going to find the name of the programme. The name of the programme was On Sport in Question, was the name of the programme. Essentially, a question time style programme for Scottish sport, and it was hosted by Archie Macpherson. And on this specific episode, it was focusing on the Cambuslang plans. Now, the panel they had, I hope you're sitting down, the panel was the two Kellys I mentioned, Michael and Kevin, and then on the right hand side, any idea who was on the opposing side, sort of championing on behalf of the Celtic support?
Jerry McNee?
I was going to say the same. Either him or Matt McGlone.
No, Matt McGlone was in the crowd, or a very, very small crowd. There was about 40 people in the crowd. So the people opposing the board on behalf of the Celtic support to sort of grill them. One was Davy Provan. This was the pre-Robocop look. And the other one was Hugh Keevins.
At that time, though, Hugh Keevins was still a reputable journalist for a Celtic medium. It wasn't until Fergus came in that that's when Keevins' sort of critique of Celtic started happening. In my opinion, anyway.
Yeah. So I think Keevins was writing on behalf of the Scotsman back then, but he was also involved with Radio Clyde, and they were quite against what the Celtic board were up to, and in turn they were on the same side by default as some of the rebels, I'm led to believe. But you had guys in the crowd like Matt McGlone and Graham Spears. One of the questions that one of the guys in the crowd asked was, and it's a very, very simple question when you think about it, it's like, we don't have any money for the team. What about the money for the team? Where are you going to get the money for the stadium when you can't even support the team on the pitch? And this stadium proposal was not supposed to be the stadium erection was not supposed to be happening until 2 or 3 years down the line. Meanwhile, the team are absolutely floundering on the pitch. So I thought that was quite an obvious question, but quite a good question at the same time. So the stadium proposal has been out. The Celtic View have ran with it, and then we go fast forward to November 18th, 1992. The Celtic View again, edition 1196, and it's now 80 pence, which is an increase of 10 pence since the previous 6 months, so fuck knows what's going on there. So Gary, what happens at this stage?
Well, just on that point, we've got a stadium to pay for, so where are they going to get money from? So it's obviously from the initial one, which I believe was in February, or April, was it? Sorry.
April 13th.
The initial proposal, April. So it's a difference of around 7 months, and not much is said about it, which kind of goes to show that, you know, there's a bit of scepticism. You would think that they would, if it was something concrete and it was something that they were going to actually be realising, they would keep the fans informed or keep it, you know, because it is a positive PR story. I think for any club, no matter how badly they're going, talk of a new stadium and stuff like that would be kind of good. So they don't really mention it until, again, and this is during the time where the rebels and stuff like that kind of putting a lot of pressure on them, and the board must be feeling that a little bit. So they kind of splash back on to the Celtic View with a thing saying green for go. Because there's been reports that the site they were supposed to be building on was actually a kind of toxic wasteland. So obviously they were getting murdered in the PR stakes, and the media kind of try, and you can imagine what the jokes must have been going around about the time about maybe a toxic team, you know, playing on toxic land. But the kind of Celtic View and the board come out and rubbish this, and they say there's so they have a 4-page spread. And they kind of go for a kind of charm offensive, talking about how it's going to be good for the local area. To do this, they have Kevin Kelly pictured on the front page with two other guys. A supposed leading surveyor with Ernst & Young called Muir Morrison. One for the unnamed Fred. There we go. And Gwyn Kennedy of Development Consultants Superstadia. And I believe that's the group that Pat Nally is the chief executive. But there's some things that are, you know, without even mentioning within the things, some things I'm noticing. The stadium's been rotated around 180 degrees. And there's just very little in the way of details. It's just basically another little PR pamphlet, basically. And they were talking about how they'd done your aforementioned geotechnic studies. and kind of rubbishing the fact that it's a toxic land and so on, and saying that no major problems have been encountered. And what they also said is, because I think when I was doing the research, I wasn't familiar with the area, so I didn't really know what Cambuslang was, but that the stadium was going to be built next to the River Clyde, and there was a chance of flooding. This was what had been said before as well, as if the river, the level of the river would have went up, then it was a chance of flooding. But the board said that it's only 100 to 1 chance of that happening, which means it's still a pretty good fucking chance of it happening. So again, it's just there's very little on detail. They just kind of talk about how there's going to bring 2,000 jobs to the area, and it's 78 million quid, and this stadium will give so much to Glasgow and so on. And it's symptomatic of the board of the time. They're just talking about how they're going to be doing these things and how great it is and blah 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 blah, without being based in any kind of reality, and very low on details. Did not even mention any of the kind of nuts and bolts that you would need and someone like, and when you see the main difference, and what I always kind of try and bring it back to is what we got instead of the board. When Fergus McCann actually did take over, you would never imagine Fergus McCann doing something like this. He's, for all his faults, and people would, especially at the time, like to kind of focus on, he would never have done something. So he was too savvy a businessman to come out with something that he wasn't going to go through with. And I think that it's just symptomatic of the old board of going for this cheap trick to try and buy themselves a little bit of time.
Classic propaganda.
Exactly.
And when you read through some of the information is available on the Celtic Wiki. Massive respect for the Celtic Wiki for having that website. It's just a complete and utter bible for this podcast, certainly. But the first Celtic view that we spoke about from April, they have like someone scanned it in, and you can read parts of it, and you can see the plans and stuff like that. I must say, like, the plans don't look that fucking good, and the stadium was going to be circle as well, like a circular shaped stadium. So that meant that the side of the pitch was always going to be a little bit of a weird shape as well, and the fans wouldn't be as close as they are now. But yeah, a lot of things that were being said in the next this November 18th Celtic View edition was like a lot of things were being said, but they were really, like, it was really thin on actual details and actual things that were happening. It was just loads of words, like buzzwords again, like huge boost, top names in industry, our own field of dreams, green for go, and like. And one of the things I read was like I think they were actually quite abrasive with the language they used. They said something along the lines of, this is like, in the Celtic View, it's like, we have scorched the stupid rumours that have been swirling around Celtic's board with these plans, and scorched, and that's not actually talking about the land. It's actually going against the naysayers, because this was considered a breakthrough, although we now know that it was never really going to happen. But one of the quotes from it was, "Big money backers are waiting in the wings to turn Celtic Stadium dream into reality, but they will remain in the background until a decision is taken on the council planning application." So, honest to God, like, reading this and like seeing and how all this is unfolding, the language used, the way that how fucking delusional things were, it just reminds me of the fucking zombies.
Never internet then, how to find things yourself, like.
No, this is true.
But I think that's testament to how well informed the Celtic supporters always been, because, in an age without internet and you're still getting fed this shit, the Celtic support still saw through it, and they weren't deferent towards these people who obviously held them in such low esteem, and they thought that the little people, the peasants, would read this and lap it up. And I'm sure, listen, we'll know, you'll know some mates who are Celtic fans that if this was happening now, would be the ones going, no, it's going to happen, and blah, blah. And some people would have been bought in by it, but I think very, very few. And I think that's testament to how knowledgeable the support can be, especially with things like this. They don't suffer these people kind of lightly. Yeah. I would think perhaps even too much, if you think of recent times and so on. It is good to be. I don't think you should always have, the board filled with kind of dewy-eyed fans. You do need a bit of realism in there, because at the end of the day, you're running a business.
Yeah, that's what Fergus brought as well. He brought the fact he was a fan, but I don't think it was a secret that he was there to make money.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because what he'd done, like he said what he was going to do, and he followed through with it. You know what I mean? And he did take. A lot of people say like, well, yeah, he came out with all that money and stuff like that, but I mean, you go invest everything you've ever done into one project. You would hope to make a return on that as well. And I don't think anyone blames him, especially when you see the people that he took over from.
Yeah, it's testament to the Celtic support that during a time, now this is like immediately pre-internet, and we're relying on radio, television and print for our information and word of mouth. Celtic support, whatever the opposite of naive is and whatever the opposite of gullible is, at that time Celtic fans, from what I've gathered, from what I've read, from what I've seen, from all the threads on Kerrydale Street, they just didn't buy it. So a couple of guys who were like, yeah, I was 10 years old and I completely bought into it, which goes back to what Liam says, or was it you said, Gary, you'd go in and you'd be really happy telling your mates at school. But to be honest, it's testament to the Celtic support that during a time where there was not much information around, they were able to make the decision on their own, and they were able to see it for what it was, and they stood up and they fought for the club. Whereas you look at what happened with Rangers a couple of years ago, and their fans were getting told left and right, this guy's a shyster, and then they would not listen. They're just servile, and then obviously they died. I want to ask you some questions about the whole idea of the club of Celtic is centred around Celtic Park. Not the whole idea, but Celtic Park is just a wonderful theatre for us. What does Celtic Park mean to you? Again, the idea of this proposal was to take us from our spiritual home and move us 6 or 7 kilometres up the road to essentially outside of Glasgow. But what does Celtic Park mean to you? That's an open question to both of you.
Well, alright, no, but to me it's just always been like the home of Celtic. Like, from being a small boy, going to the games, getting lifted over to on the terracings in the jungle, and then obviously to modern day to protect this season when the Man City game. Could you imagine taking all that away and having a new stadium relocated in another part of town, which is not exactly town, it's Cambuslang?
Yeah.
And would that same atmosphere, would those same memories be created there?
No. Yeah. Let me ask you, how do you get to your games, Liam? Obviously you're coming from Dumbarton.
Back then I was going on a supporters bus. Now I drive.
Right, okay. And now you're obviously the capo of the Green Brigade as well. So you've made that transition all the way through. Gary, what does it mean to you? I know it's a really fucking up our own arse question, but the whole idea of taking that experience away from you and moving it to some unknown land is absolutely jarring. What does it mean to you, Gary?
I think it really depends. You know what I mean? If the alternative was to stay in the stadium as it was, then I would have said that you should. Celtic. I mean, I wouldn't be adverse to it in the sense that, I mean, new memories can be made and stuff like that. I know that's quite a hard way to say it. I think what's best for the club, especially at this time when you're moving into the era of all-seater stadiums and stuff like that, if the alternative was to just stay there and trundle along like we had been, I think we'd be talking about a very different Celtic today. But I would not change it for one bit the way it's worked out. I think, and you know what I mean, for me personally, there's many drawbacks. You know, it's at the other end of the city for me. It doesn't have that great transport links and so on, but just that feeling of walking round a corner and just seeing it in the distance, and no matter what age you are or whatever, that feeling of my dad used to have a season ticket in the North Stand Upper, and just, you know, when you're a kid, so you're walking up, and he used to sit with my uncle, and sometimes I'd get one of the season tickets, and just walking up, you know, you feel like you're, and you just can't wait, and that first little view just as you go over, even when the teams are warming up, it never really leaves you. And I couldn't think of it now, you know, sitting now with it and all the memories that we've had there, and, the things that have been said about the stadium. And when you consider, you can go through a litany of teams who've moved stadium, and just look at West Ham now. Just look at how their fans are really fucked off for the fact they've moved to this new modern stadium, but it's soulless and it doesn't quite do anything. And I've been in many big stadiums around the world. None of them are like Celtic Park. It has a unique thing about it, and you just need to ask anyone who plays there on a big night what they think about it, and that's testament to the fans as well. But even in terms of a modern stadium and how it's still managed to keep that level of noise and that atmosphere, you wouldn't change it for the world.
Yeah, now that's probably a good time for us to talk about the current plans. Well, the plans that were announced in late February to develop the area next to the Celtic Way. Currently, Celtic have the Celtic Store. I'm pretty sure the Celtic Store's just like a massive porta cabin. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
pretty much is. Same with the ticket office as well. It's just a porta cabin.
Right. The ticket office. I mean, fair enough. The ticket office. Well, not really. We are Celtic, but tell us, Liam, what do you have? Like, do you want to tell us a little bit about? Just refresh our memories about what's going to be happening in the near future, and why these plans that have been announced have not came under any scrutiny. That's a question for later, but do you want to tell us about the plans?
Well, they're obviously proposing to build a new ticket office and museum combined as one building, which I think would be a great thing. There's so much history, hence why you do this podcast. So much history of this club goes unnoticed that people don't know about. So to put a museum outside the stadium, along the Celtic Way, in front of that, where you can go and do the tour inside the stadium as well as having a museum, I think it's essential for not just us as Celtic fans, but fans coming from abroad. Like, you've obviously been abroad to the games yourself via coming to support Celtic for a Champions League. Like, you're obviously, I know you're a Glaswegian, so therefore generally our day consists of let's go and get drunk, but generally European people might not have the same mentality as us, so they might want to find out a bit more about the team they're playing. So I'd say it's a great thing. And then the other proposal is obviously the hotel, which I'm a bit sceptical of the hotel. I don't know if that will happen. I don't know if that was just a wee bit of a modern day romance situation, but I think because we are that financially sound just now, that these things that have been proposed are seen believable. Because if you look at what's been proposed, it's not that different from what the Kellys proposed all those years ago.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is different in the sense a lot of the things that they proposed were absolutely ridiculous, but in the same sense, what they proposed we're getting now. But the main thing we're talking about here is actually shutting down Celtic Park in Parkhead and then restarting it a couple of miles, 3 or 4 miles, whatever it is, down the road. So it's not quite the same, but it's just funny that times are so different now that they're under no scrutiny. We have the complete faith in the board. Times are it's almost like that episode of Red Dwarf where they have that parallel universe, and you look back and you're like, I can't believe that's the same Celtic that I'm following, and I'm currently doing a podcast about it, and I spend almost every single day just talking and thinking about Celtic. But while we're talking about the hotel, any name suggestions for the hotel? I was thinking about the Pro Hotel.
No, I'll go with that. That gets my vote.
Liam?
I've not got anything that's going to trump that, you know, right?
Right. Pro Hotel it is. Then hopefully someone from Celtic will be listening to this, and yeah, they can use that name as they want. So we were initially kind of digressing here. We were initially just asking about what Celtic Park means to you. Yeah, that feeling of just turning that corner and seeing it, or making that journey from the town when you're walking up through the Gallagate, or you're getting the train to Belgrove and you're stopping at the pubs all the way along. It's just an absolute ritual. It's something that I miss massively. Graham. Well, listen to me. My ex-boyfriend, my ex-boyfriend. My ex-man and my ex-man.
Well, I'm still over that threesome for last week.
I know. Gary, you said about the transport links are not great. I don't know when the last time you were at Celtic Park, but because of the redevelopment of Parkhead as an area, with the velodrome and things like that, the transport links are a lot better. Not necessarily public transport, but getting there in a car is relatively easy. The roads are very, very wide, and it's a completely different experience now.
I should say, I was back last Christmas. I should say that being from the kind of northwest of the city, it was always the train that I got, and we'd always have to go off at Belgrove Station. It wasn't that much of a ball ache, if I'm being honest, because you were mostly getting up on the train and getting bevied anyway, and then hiding it from the police at the station, then popping it back out again. So it wasn't that bad. It was just those little things. You're just like, why doesn't it have a subway station? Why doesn't it have a train station right? With the amount of traffic that must go through there at certain times, you would think they'd have one a lot closer. But again, it's not the end of the world.
Can I ask 2 questions? First question is to Gary about football experiences in South America. Can you tell us about, this is really boring, but the transport links and how you get to the stadium, getting tickets? Can you talk us through that whole process?
No, it's fine. It's a wee bit different here. Obviously, I live in Bogota, so I've been to a few of the main teams here are Millonarios and Santa Fe, and I've been to one of the derby games and a few of the Millonarios games. Which I'll take a bit of stick for, considering they play in blue and their fans are absolute ball bags. But in terms of getting a ticket, they've got a kind of ultra scene here. They've got pretty mad groups of fans behind the goals. Two of the ones for me, Millonarios, they literally had to sign a peace accord between each other. It was all a bit kind of Glasgow gangs, Razor Gang type shit. But they were kind of 2 warring factions when the fans, kind of like PSG used to have, but they signed this peace accord, and they're kind of all right now with each other. So they have their own kind of setup, and kind of like Italy in some ways, where the head of these groups kind of have a bit of power and have a bit of sway over the team, and can be seen in kind of boardrooms at times and stuff like that. So it's a little bit shady in that sense. But just as a normal punter to buy a ticket, you would just go to kind of like a Ticket Scotland type thing, and you can just buy your tickets from there. In terms of the match day experience, there's a lot of singing, a lot of jumping around and so on, and referees aren't liked, police aren't liked. It's football. It's football is anywhere. What I'd say is it's just kind of non-stop singing. But one thing that I think we've got better at Celtic stuff is a little bit more coordinated, and it's not just people kind of going off on their own. You can always get tickets, rarely sell out unless it's a really big game. So yeah, it's that. But it's not quite as mental and or of as good a standard as Argentina, but it's like a kind of mini version of that.
So leads me very nicely into my next question to both of you. What is the best match day experience you've had that's not Celtic Park, and it can't be in Scotland?
I went to the Boiling Ground when it was West Ham played there. Minus the pre-match entertainment where we went to the Boiling Bar and you had some guy on top of a table singing 10 German Bombers. Minus that fact. But like leading up on the underground up to it, and then obviously into the bar, right? If that's your kind of thing, like obviously it's not our kind of thing. But there was a buzz in the bar, and like everybody's just there. Like proper East London boys, like just there for a good day, and then there was a good buzz in the stadium. I'm sure it was a Saturday night game as well, so that probably added to it. Everybody probably around the skite all day. But no, that's with the exception of Parkhead and exception of not being at a Celtic game as well, i.e. one in Europe away. That was pretty decent, as well as Slavia Prague. I went to Slavia Prague, was last year or the year before, but ended up in the Ultras end. And the game was terrible. Probably one of the worst games of footballs I've seen. But their ultras were phenomenal. Non-stop, 90 minutes, singing and everything. Flares going off. It was great. And I think that cost £5.
Yeah, I think right now as we record, there is a Celtic Prague thing happening with the Celtic Graves now to do with Johnny Madden. Have you been following that on Twitter?
Yes. I saw that today. I haven't been following it. I just noted that there was an article up.
Yeah, there's a lot of chat and a lot of guys who are involved in the Celtic Graves and involved in Celtic research. I'm not sure if anyone from the Celtic Wiki's there, but I know there's going to be recordings and it'll hopefully be released as a podcast. I'm not sure where, if it's Hail Hail Media or it's going to be Celtic Underground. It doesn't really matter. But yeah, there's a bit of a connection actually between Celtic and Prague, but that's a whole other... Let's not digress too much. But Gary, favourite match day experience that's not been Celtic Park?
Well, I've happened to live in countries that, I mean, Colombia has a fairly good footballing culture, but before I lived in Korea, and football's not one of the, especially the domestic league, it's not one of the, but I felt like the stadium I went to was Daegu FC. We felt like a Queen's Park game. I was in like a 67,000 seater stadium with 1,000 people in it. So, not the best, but I was at the World Cup in 2014, and I was based in Salvador, which is one of the kind of beach cities in Brazil. I was there for like basically the full month, and it was just a great month, just kind of on the tear. And I went to the France, I don't know if you remember the France-Switzerland game at the World Cup. It was like 5-2. But yeah, so France battered Switzerland. It was just a great day. Just the whole, I mean, the World Cup's a bit different in that sense, is the fact that it's just the whole day's an occasion, and you're just, everyone's out, everyone's happy, especially if the game's in that city. There's a real buzz about the place, and it was one of those days where we're around the stadium, but nobody had a phone, and I had tickets belonging to one of my mates, and try to get in contact with people and stuff like that. It was just like kind of hectic, and then when you get in the stadium, it's just a wall of noise, and everyone's getting pissed, and it's a bit of a party. And just before the start of the game, I remember turning round. So this is like in Brazil. I remember turning round, just looking up. About 10 seats behind me were two guys in their 50s wearing the hoops. And I was just like, fucking hell. It's just like anywhere you go, you tend to just bump into it. It just reminds you of kind of, the reason why you love football. So I just went up and spoke to the lads, and they were like, I think there were two guys from Livingston, and they'd been going to World Cups constantly and just constantly wearing the hoops. So I'd say that outside of Scotland, that'd be my best footballing experience.
Could you drink in the stadiums in Brazil? And Liam, could you drink in the West Ham ground?
Aye, you could have drank in the West Ham ground, but only in the concourse, not at your seat.
Still, that's fair. What about in Brazil, Gary?
Yeah, I don't think they would do it in normal games, but for the World Cup, because they're sponsored by like Budweiser and stuff like that, they kind of have to let the companies do whatever they want. The spirit of football. Yeah,
I think personally, the memory that sticks out most for going to a football stadium was, I've been to quite a few Bundesliga matches. I went to see FC Cologne when they had Rasmussen. Do you remember they took Rasmussen? Big Morten Rasmussen from Celtic on loan. And I was over in Cologne I was in Dusseldorf for a few days and went to Cologne for a match. And the whole experience was great. The game wasn't very good, but I think you bought a ticket for the game, and that got your transport as well. And because of the World Cup was in Germany a few years before that, they had actually a tram that would take you from the city centre and take you right to the stadium, like right outside the door of the stadium, and just drop you off. And then you went inside. And then I don't know if you've been to any German matches before, but you can just buy. There's a guy just walks about with a big massive backpack. It's like a baseball match, selling hot dogs and throwing hot peanuts. Like the guy's got a backpack full of beer, and you just buy a plastic cup, and then you just get it topped up. Well, you don't get it topped up, obviously you have to pay. So that's an amazing thing. Like, the atmosphere was amazing. The stadium was a peach, the Cologne Stadium. You would never think, but Cologne, a great stadium, great experience. Not a great match, but still. And the next one I thought was really good was the Bernabeu. Right outside the Bernabeu, there's a metro stop. The stadium itself is fucking amazing, like, such a nice stadium. And there's loads of bars outside the ground that are not even expensive at all, in the slightest. So those are my two.
Sorry, just to ask you, because I've never been to any of those stadiums, is it more impressive than the Nou Camp?
Aye, I don't like the Nou Camp. I've just had a lot of shit experiences in the Nou Camp. Like, I was at that Celtic match, the one we played there. I was at the one where we lost 2-1, I think, when we went to the last 16. Is that right? And Messi got injured,
yes,
and he was crying. I was at that one.
1-0 that was.
Aye, 1-0, that's right. Yeah, I was at that one, but I haven't been for a La Liga match. I kind of want to go just to see if it would be different, because when you're an away fan, you're treated like I was treated like shite basically. But I don't really like it. I'm not a big fan. It's a bit of a cunt to get to. That, in my experience, on match night, it's just fucking so busy. But with the Bernabeu, I just prefer it inside because I just like the actual structure of the stadium better, and it's just more, I don't know, it just feels more impressive. It feels more modern, but not like, it feels like a proper stadium. The Nou Camp, as you know, is like a bowl, I actually prefer the Calderon to the new camp as well, if I'm being honest. I'm not a big fan of it, but we're digressing, as we like to do in this podcast. Let's kind of pull it back a little bit and move on to Gefenor. What does Gefenor mean? Does anyone know?
The actual translation, what they were.
It was just a very, very shite question, so let's just pretend I never asked it. So let's move forward to February 25th. I don't know what the fuck it means, but let's go forward to February 25th, 1994. So we kind of skipped a year and a half. November 18th, 1992, we're going forward to the next important date in this saga of this toxic board in the toxic wasteland in the proposal to move Celtic to the outskirts of Glasgow. So there's a press conference, step forward Gefenor. They were a London-based firm, I think they were Swiss, and they were supposedly funding the stadium, which was announced at a press conference by the Celtic board. Now, when they announced that the stadium, when they made this further announcement in this press conference, the stadium had magically lost 12,000 seats. Did you come across that?
I don't know that bit, no.
Aye, they came at basically 12,000 seats had been removed, so I think it was 52,000, now it was 40,000. Not really sure where the 12,000 seats were going or what happened to them. This is obviously pre-internet days. So they've announced that they've got these backers, Gefenor, Superstadia are involved, to going to build the structure, they're going to do this and going to do that. They've made this press conference. Within an hour, people have contacted Gefenor, and Gefenor are like, what are you talking about? We don't really know what's going on here. Superstadia also confirmed, nah, this is not true. Gefenor and Superstadia then make a statement to say, things are not the case with Celtic. Yes, we've spoken to them, but there's nothing in place to do this. Do you think this was a kind of a Craig White style moment for the Celtic board?
I think it was definitely the point where I reckon they even knew the gig was up. Like, from what I could see, and again, I'm taking the kind of idea of this from the book that I'd read. It's just that the fans have been wanting change for so long, and you think about it, 4 years is a massive amount of time if it's just a daily grind, your team's not successful and so on. And the fans are just wanting change for so long, and it felt at this point that the pressure was kind of getting to the board. And I do remember when they called this press conference, there was a feeling between the Celtic fans like, this is it, like they're actually going to come out and say, like, we need to sell up or something like that, or the bank's calling it in. There was a feeling that this was the moment. And then when they came out with this shit about the stadium again, I think the level of rage kind of just went at this point, and the fans just went, right, this is absolutely enough. And I think this is a kind of tipping point completely. Not that any fans wanted them to stay, but there was not really much you could do if they weren't willing to budge, and the fans felt that this was the point where they were finally going to, say the gig's up, and then they come back out with this again and they regurgitate it, and it's even more amateurish than the first one, and it's the beginning of the end for them, really. Yeah,
on the Celtic Underground podcast, which I think is episode 234 from 2 years ago, it's a really good episode with St Anthony interviewing Michael Kelly about his involvement with Celtic, and they talk quite extensively about the Cambuslang proposals, amongst other things. Bearing in mind, throughout this entire time, Celtic are toiling on and off the pitch. There is still the Celts for Change thing was happening. The rebels are there. They're pushing the ball to try and get them to come out, to get them to give up power and to accept a bid. But on the podcast, as we said at the start, Gary, Kelly came across as a man who was not willing to give up anything. He was not, even 20 years later, he was still quite indignant about the fact that he was in the right to hold power for as long as he did. He actually said, obviously, this is regarding Gefenor, obviously they're going to deny the goings-on as they were valuable. They were at early stages, and this was normal for them to say this. So even though Gefenor came out and heard Celtic have said that they are going to be backed, they're going to be funding this, Gefenor released a statement going, is that right? Aye. And it's the same with that Superstadia. So basically they told the Celtic board, the bank then all heard this. So I think this is about the time when David Smith he's been involved with Celtic for a while, but he becomes a bit of a precarious character, shall we say?
Yep, no, I think this is, as you say, it gets to that point where it just seems like kind of rats running from a sinking ship. And from a point of them being very, very bombastic and very, no, we're fine, everything's fine, you kind of see that the pressure's getting to them, the dam's beginning to fall in here, and everyone kind of runs for the house. And Smith's kind of credibility's really tested within these few days.
Right, I just want to say thank you very much for using bombastic on the podcast. That was brilliant. Really, really good. I like that a lot.
It's Timmy Podcast Scrabble.
That's it, mate. Aye, David Smith is the guy who was supposedly in charge of the finances at Celtic, I think, and he was not telling the truth to the Celtic board about the real financial situation. Now, I don't believe for a minute he was the sole person in charge of that, and they would have known to an extent. But I think my understanding is when the bank found out about all this going on, they were like, hold on a minute, you owe us a lot of money. This was the Bank of Scotland, I've since learned. This was the Bank of Scotland. And they basically said to Celtic, let's have a meeting right now. So a meeting was had with the Bank of Scotland, Kevin Kelly, Tom Grant, James Farrell and Jack McGinn. Now, Kevin Kelly and Jack McGinn, their families are absolutely, I can't think of another synonym for woven. So their entire families have been involved with Celtic since the beginning. McGinn family, the White family as well, were on the scene at this point as well. And Kevin Kelly. These are like some of the families that really, really helped build Celtic to where they were. And now we're talking about when they had to leave, which is fine, but they had this meeting with the Bank of Scotland, and the Bank of Scotland basically said, if you don't give us the money that you owe us, that we've been asking for ages, then we're going to put you into immediate and dire... The quote was, Celtic were in immediate and dire peril of being put into receivership. So this is when it became really clear that things were serious for Celtic. This is like 2 or 3 weeks before the actual takeover with Fergus McCann happens. So this David Smith guy was then, I think he was then struck off. I think he was then bagged. But he was extremely involved in, not necessarily lying, but I think withholding the truth. But I firmly believe that the board would have known everything that was going on anyway to an extent. So the Celts for Change organised a boycott of a game against Kilmarnock at this point. And what they did was they had a guy that represented Celts for Change standing at every turnstile to pass out leaflets to say, please don't go to the game, boycott the game, support the Celts for Change, support the fans, don't support the board, sack the board type thing. And they were standing there with clickers, and I think the attendance of the game was really, really low. Does anyone know which game I'm talking about? Does anyone have any idea what game this was?
I recall reading about it, but I don't recall it.
Was it against Kilmarnock?
It was against Kilmarnock. Very good. History boy, Gary.
No, I just remember, because they had the people with the T-shirts, didn't they, back the team's side of the board?
Yes.
And did we...
That was at Ibrox, was it not?
No, that was at the Celtic end.
Yeah. And it was... Did we win 1-0? I remember reading about it. I think it was in Not The View from fucking way back. I was reading about it, and we won like from like a fucking deflected goal or some shit. It was just like something symptomatic of the whole fucking club at the time.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely spot on. 1-0 against Kilmarnock. Celtic scored in the 90th minute, John Collins. And this is the game before the takeover. Does anyone know why this game is also significant for something completely unrelated? Not significant, but a funny thing.
No, go on.
The Fenian Fox.
Yeah.
A fox ran on the pitch.
No, well, news to me.
The Fenian Fox. So, as I was saying, the Celtic Underground podcast, which was an excellent listen, and it was really informative for the research that we've been doing. St Anthony was kind of asking him questions. He was kind of dodging the questions in the same way. They were not really giving up much information in those Celtic views, when all they were quite happy to do was hit you with like buzzwords. But he basically said, now I don't know if you know this, but Michael Kelly released a book called Paradise Lost, which sort of detailed his experience at Celtic. I think he feels really hard done by through Celtic and the way things panned out. But he basically said, to answer the questions, one of the questions he got asked was quite a very, I think it was pretty much a yes-no question, and he was basically saying, read my book. And he's like, read my book if you want to know the real answer. And it was just like, the fact that you're telling people that, and you've got the chance to, like, you know, this is 20 years later, you've got the chance to sort of, you have the platform to set the record straight, and he was still a bit coy about things. It just gave me the impression that they were kind of out of touch. Like Gary said earlier on, it seemed like they were really so up their own arse, so like snooty, and thought so little of the Celtic fans that even to this day it's not a real surprise that these guys still have the same opinions from back then. Even with hindsight and everything that's happened, it's just they're still the same way now.
The sad thing about the whole thing is that you think of the fact that these are the people that are running the club. I mean, not these people exactly, but them and their families. Been running the club for years and years and years through good times and bad, and you just wonder what would have happened if it had someone that was at least in the least bit competent.
Yeah.
And given the backing that, I mean, if we had a board, and again, not perfect in any stretch of imagination, but the board that we have now, if we'd have had that, a kind of just a benevolent, just a kind of backseat, just making sure things tick over well type of board that invested when we should have been investing, and saving when we should have been saving, I think you would have seen who knows what the fuck we could have won. We could have won more European trophies. We could have been a lot more successful. Again, that's it. That's, you know, it's been and gone, but it's just that level of bumbling incompetence. And even to hear them now, I mean, again, you know, time passes and you begin to kind of go, right, well, you know, they obviously thought that was best at the time. But just listening to that podcast today, I was just incredulous with how blinkered that they could be. I mean, I think one of his rationale was as to why they would have been better to run the club, or the people running the club have not been better than them, was because Celtic get knocked out of or get beaten a cup final by Rafe Rovers. And it's like, that never happened under our thing. Because you ran the fucking team, didn't you, you clown? Like, it's just that type of way of thinking. You're just like, you do not have a clue. And the fact that you're in that position from nepotism and not through any kind of merit just is a kind of stain on you, and it's hurt the club. So I have no sympathy for them whatsoever.
I think you're spot on, Gary, when you say they were in a position... they were in the position they were in because of nepotism. Basically, in the Sporting Question debate, which was just a wash with people wearing boot-cut denims and middle sheds and fucking goatees and leather waistcoats and all that sort of stuff. Basically, one of the comments from the crowd was that these guys were in a position because of privilege. They were not there because they were real fans, which really, really is something that stood out to me, because these guys were in charge of Celtic, and they probably never actually paid a single penny to get into the stadium, but yet they were taking things out. I think Michael Kelly even said he never ever took any money from Celtic, but I'm pretty sure they were rocking Celtic's dime left and right on holidays and stuff like that. Anyway, I want to quickly talk about the Sporting Question debate. Basically, one of the questions that was asked by the crowd, which contained guys like, as I say, Matt McGlone and Graham Spears, amongst other guys, was, if someone comes to you with the money to take Celtic off your hands, a reasonable amount of money, would you say yes or no? And they were the Kellys who were on the panel really were sidestepping. They basically said, well, you know, I would need to actually get to know them as a person first. Are they Celtic men? Blah blah blah. They were kind of stammering their way through that, like I just stammered there. But they said they wouldn't relinquish power to just anyone. They would need to be, they would say they would need to get to know them. What does that even mean?
Maybe they were thinking in the context that because they were obviously so disillusioned by their own status within Celtic that they were obviously perceiving that they didn't want to hand over the reins to somebody else that wasn't going to be good for the club, but they couldn't obviously see that they weren't good for the club.
Yeah, they were also denying, they were being told by people, and this was widely reported, they were saying people have bid for Celtic that we as a support know are good for Celtic, and you're turning them down. And they turned round and said, we have not had any offers. They're actually categorically denying we have had any offers, even though the press were white. Now, the press are no measure of truth. However, it was widely reported by the press, and also the fans were saying people are coming to you with offers to take the club from your hands and you are turning them down. It just seemed like they were so entrenched and so like rooted in their own arse basically, that they just didn't want to give anything away. They were actually talking about how, we are in debt now. And Davy Provan actually said, on behalf of Celtic, the fans were basically saying 2 years ago Celtic turned a profit, this year they're now running on a debt. And they turn around and says, well, debt's actually quite normal, debt's not a bad thing, we're going to try and improve the debt. They're giving his moonbeams. They were essentially just lying through their teeth on this panel. And they actually, you could see their body language, and you could see with the language they were using, but also the body language and how tense they looked, they felt that everyone was against them. And to be honest, when the press were against them, and the press were also in collusion with the support, which never really happens, were against them, they never really had a chance. But as I say, when you're looking back at this compared to now, like now is the fucking a parallel universe compared to what it was like in the early 90s.
100%. The press couldn't be more against us now. That's because we're the establishment club now as well.
Yeah, we are the establishment club, that's it, mate. And make sure every cunt knows that. Everyone make sure you tell them it.
Well, the only reason that we are is because we managed to get rid of these parasites, and I don't think that they deserve any. I've seen people going, well, maybe they just thought it was best what they're doing, what they're doing for the club. Who knows how many years they set this club back? And the only thing I'm thankful for is that we managed to get rid of them in time. And it's just the fact that they were the last people to know when to leave shows you the level of delusion. Surely somewhere deep down they must have known. Sorry,
basically that wanker guy at a party that nobody wants to be there.
I never see that guy at a party. Oh wait, shit.
That guy is basically that drunken uncle at the party that's sort of offending people with the wine-stained teeth.
No, I'm always the one that's most drunk, so I never see that guy.
Aye, well, but yeah, it just seems like they were stinking the place out. They were not idiots, but they were behaving like idiots. And this is not a takeover. This is not a takeover Celtic takeover podcast. It's not a Fergus McCann podcast. This episode in particular is not that. That'll happen one day. But these guys dug in, and then as we say, when the bank had announced, Celtic are in dire straits, Geffenor said, we're not giving you the money for this stadium proposal. The bank went, hold on a minute, stadium proposal? Where the fuck's this money coming from? Where are Celtic getting this money from? And then that's when the house of cards collapsed, as they say, and the rest, as we now know, was history. And it's a good point, Gary. They probably did set Celtic back quite a long way. And it took Celtic how many years, and when do you think Celtic got back on a level footing, realistically? What season can you point to? I've got one in mind, but I'd like to hear both of you when Celtic really became a force again.
For me, it would be the season Martin O'Neill walked through that door. That was the day that Celtic put down a marker to say that we are back.
I would say even before then, I'd say the season where the Janssen season where we stopped at 10, I'd say that's the first time that you could say that we were running in a self-sufficient way, and that we could. My measure of it would always be: if we need a player, can we go out and buy him? If the manager says, "Listen, we're really bad at centre back. I need this player to go out and buy him." If you can go out and buy him without needing to do too much to get that money, then I'd say that's the point where you're like, well, yeah, we're a self-sufficient club.
Yeah, and I would agree. The Wim Janssen season was really the kind of measure of how far we'd came. Just want to say, to kind of, not in defence of the board, but when Liam Brady was announced as manager and he was given that role, he spent quite a lot of money, and he was pretty rubbish. He was given a lot of money by the board and a lot of trust. He ends up leaving, and then he's replaced by Lou Macari. Did you hear in that podcast, the Celtic Underground one, where St Anthony asked him, do you think Lou Macari was dedicated to Celtic? And he was like, oh, absolutely. No question whatsoever. I knew Lou as a man, and he was 100% dedicated to Celtic. But even though Lou Macari was commuting on a weekly basis from Stoke-on-Trent. How dedicated is that?
Well, very.
Yeah, it's just shows you how. Well, I mean, that just tells you all you need to know. You're not judging people on, and McCann would have judged people on what he'd done for him, or done for the club, or done in the role that they were hired for. And if you just see there, even that snippet just shows, well, no, Lou's a good guy, and I know Lou, I trust him. Not judging him on his actions, judging him based on who he is and his relationship with him, and that sums up the old board to an absolute T.
They were. I think he found it really difficult to be objective and to actually take a step back and look at things through a different lens. He was just so. I just got the impression they were really up their own arse. Like, they had just no sense of what the fans wanted, no sense of reality, and that's why it came to such a big. They came to such a large demise, and they were forced out. And I think he was really, really bitter. Let me ask you some questions before we finish here. Do you think this whole debacle, now this is one small part of this whole, that 4 or 5 year window, 6 year window in the 90s and late 80s where it was just really bad? This is just like a small little fucking crumb. Do you think this tiny debacle sort of toughened Celtic fans' skin long term, made us more cautious of cunts?
And you go, Liam?
I don't know if it toughened the skin. I think there was always a resolve there. Like, obviously, like, coming from the whole ethos of Celtic, how it was open for everyone, the whole predominantly, not necessarily, but predominantly the Irish Catholic background, which obviously coming through all the years in Glasgow was seen as a second-class citizen. I always think there's been that sort of toughened skin on a Celtic supporter, but I always think that the Celtic supporters have been wise enough and have always had caution about everything due to everything that's happened throughout, not just as a fan, but just obviously in their life.
I would say that, yeah, we've always had that. I think there's always that chip on the shoulder coming from the kind of diaspora of the support, of just not trusting authority and stuff like that because of, obviously, family experiences and the kind of ancestral history of the people who support the club. But I would also say that I think this educated a lot of Celtic fans. I think this happened at a time when football was changing and the way clubs are owned and public listings and all that shit. Football became a business, and we happened to just go through this thing at a time when this was happening, so we had to go through this and getting the club back. I think without the fans, this would not have happened, and it's really, although it's a testament to people like Fergus McCann and Dempsey, who are also fans, but they were also at the business end of it. The Celts for Change and that whole mobilisation of this might not be good for the club in the short term, but we know it's going to be good for the club in the long term, and ultimately bring it down to the fact that it's our fucking club, and if we see that it's been demoralised and run down, then we have that right to stand up against it. And it's one of the great chapters of the fans' history, I would say. And you saw real kind of citizen action from the fans and direct action against the board, and it would never have came down without the fans, and we would never have rebuilt the club without the fans. And that's a real thing that we should keep in mind here.
Very, very, very well put. More than a club, my man. More than a club.
Less than a Kit Kat.
Less than a Kit Kat. So, I think one of the things we haven't spoken about on this was the reasons. Do you know the reasons why they wanted to move the stadium?
Was it? I'm just taking this from memory, so I could be completely wrong. But there wasn't a lot of. I do know, and this was a thing that went into the Fergus McCann era, that they found difficult getting planning permission because of the graveyard behind the thing. I could be wrong in terms of that's the reason why they kind of wanted to leave, but there was some issues in terms of the surrounding areas, and that people weren't really able to. They didn't have as much scope to have the plans. Am I right? Am I wrong?
No, you were kind of given me an answer that I don't actually have, which yours sounds much more plausible. But
I do know that something like, I'm pretty sure Celtic get charged something like 50 grand to have. Do you know when you go to the back of the north stand, the metal things that kind of jut out from the stand, the metal stanchions?
Yeah,
they kind of spill over into the graveyard. I do know Celtic had to pay something ridiculous just to be in that kind of fucking airspace.
That's why it can't leave us out as well, isn't it? Because they couldn't get that's why it can't leave us out, because they couldn't get planning permission to go in the graveyard, and they had to pay the money for the shadow overhang on the graveyard.
Yes.
It's a prime position if you're a Tim, that though, the graveyard, innit? Like, I want the shadow of Celtic Park over me as I'm lying there. Dead.
Having some JTs with bucket bottles running over you to get into the access to the road. It's brilliant.
Well, to answer the question that I asked you, and you've given me an answer that's probably true as well, Kelly himself actually said the reason that they're moving was for the revenue. They wanted to do that to make more money, but it was a long-term strategy. They wanted to do it so they made money over the long term, and it would provide stability for the club. Basically, he kept going on about economic circumstances, football's changing, blah, blah, blah. Much like you said, Gary, about how, you know, things were changing and football clubs were becoming public properties and stuff like that. So that was kind of the reason why. But again, it's just very, very vague sort of reasons. And one of the things, again, to go back to what I said at the start, which was said in that sport in question, was like, if you've got the money to fucking move Celtic Park to another place, why have you not got money to put money? Like, why have you not got the money to invest in the team? Like, the team first and foremost is like, we are the fans. We want to see our spiritual home stay where it is, but also we want to see players in the pitch that we can align with, which I thought was like extremely on the money for me.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here then and say the reason they couldn't invest in the team was because due to the Taylor report, and they had to make it an all-seater stadium.
Fuck, I don't know if we could. Hang on to edit that out, mate. That's fine. No, joking. What do you think of that, Gary?
About the Taylor report?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Taylor report obviously meant that we had to everyone had to move kind of with the times. But as you can see, to me the most logical thing would have been what actually happened, and that's you can rebuild on Celtic Park. And they managed to do that. Of course, it didn't. They didn't just move to a custom-built stadium and stuff like that. But Cambuslang was going to be that as well. They were going to build that in stages, like they done with Celtic Park. So I don't really buy. One thing I would say though, in terms of them trying to get revenue and stuff like that, that is probably one thing that they're actually quite right about. And you've seen that we are still playing catch up with that now. Obviously, the great strides have been made with the Celtic way and stuff like that. But in terms of up until like 5 or 6 years ago, around Celtic Park there was not really much there in terms to add to the matchday experience. So we kind of cottoned onto that a little bit late. So that's probably one thing that I'd give them. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt over, I'll say.
I think the way things have panned out with the Commonwealth Games coming to Glasgow, and it's just everything that's happened since, as Gary said earlier, there's no regrets with how things panned out. And with the stadium being developed and the where it is now, it looks amazing. It's such an impressive stadium. Like stepping back and not being a Celtic fan, which is difficult to do, but it's such an impressive looking stadium. But the surrounding area is now has been built up, I guess, in the Olympic the athletes' village and the velodrome and things like that. And the whole matchday experience has been improved. And obviously we've now got this next part. The hotel, the museum, and the ticket office and the shop is going to be all improved. So I think like we're talking only 22 years is, I guess, 25 years since it was announced.
Yeah,
I guess it's like, is that, I don't know if that's a long amount of time, but we've seemed to have came a long way. Yeah, it's a generation, but we've came a long, long way since like the chat from the Kellys and the Whites to propose to move Celtic Park. The stadium, in my opinion, now is just a fucking theatre of dreams. So Celtic Park, the experience now, absolutely no regrets. I don't believe in the regrets of this whole entire situation. The way things have worked out. Obviously, we're now in the fucking rosiest patch of football we've been in for so fucking long, since back to the Martin O'Neill days, so it's kind of easy for us to say that now, but I don't have any regrets. Is there anything else you want to add on this?
No, I think I've got everything out all that suppressed anger that I had. I think I've vented it well enough. Just, it's good to look back on these things when you see how things have worked out, and the good guys win in the end.
It's a kind of a negative podcast we've had tonight, and we don't normally do negative podcasts as such. But it's good to kind of recognise when things were bad to appreciate the good. And as I say, now is just a fucking amazing time. Tomorrow Celtic are playing Hearts, and hopefully by the time this is released, which is going to be the weekend of the 7th or 8th, which is basically Easter, hopefully Celtic are champions. Liam, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I don't have anything else to add to this. It was a long, horrible, dark period. But as you have pointed out, it's turned out for the best.
Yeah, and you have to go through all that crap to come out the other side, and we're really in a stable position now, and things are good. I just want to finish on a quote from Kerrydale Street. A guy who posted on Kerrydale Street said, "The results of a recent study would indicate that a move away from Parkhead may be on the cards at some point. Some lad let Football Manager simulate for 1,000 years. In 1,000 years, Celtic have the highest average attendance in Europe, averaging a gate close to 500,000. The 10 in a row was achieved. A new milestone of 1,000 league titles in a row has just been passed, but no mention of us in the Champions League."
I'll take that.
So yeah, that takes us to the end of the Cambuslang episodes. Not a positive one, but one that's worthy of doing a full episode on. You can find us online if you want, at History Bhoys Abroad. I don't think that's our email address. It's at Boys Abroad for the Twitter. If you don't already follow us, give us a message, get in contact. If you have any stories, any anecdotes, we're completely open to these sort of things. If you want to email us, I think it's historyboys@gmail.com. The next podcast is going to be on the 0708 season, with more of a focus on the impact that Barry Robson and Paul Hartley had with Celtic. That's going to be episode 27, I think. That'll be out in the coming weeks. Yeah, 27. I'm kind of losing track now. We're getting to the stage where we're almost at 30, and we're also getting to the stage where 30 podcasts, like actual episodes of History Bhoys Abroad, but also getting to the stage we've been doing this for a year, because we've only been doing this for about 8 months, which seems a lot longer, but it's been good, man. So thanks for all the Twitter feedback. It's probably a good time to actually just give it. We never had much of a feedback for this episode, but it's probably a good time to do that. And one was from Martino at Mr. Martino. He says, "Car parking in a dedicated station, what's not to like? If it hadn't been a moonbeam, we'd have hosted a Champions League final by now." Chris Henderson at C_Hend82 said, "The final desperate flailing of the old board. The interview with the guy from Geffenor who didn't have a clue was a particular highlight." The next episode will be on Hail Hail Media. You can find us on there just by subscribing. We are on iTunes, YouTube, Spreaker, SoundCloud. Everywhere that podcasts live, you will find Hail Hail Media. And again, thanks for all the feedback. Hope you enjoy your weekend. Hail Hail.
Just like season change, I bring rainfall or sunshine when it's summertime, y'all. Or cold shoulders when it's winter time, or colors when it's spring, I seem to stand tall. Different time, different day, different way. The original way with subliminal rays, instant plays. Good vibes like we on some Roy Ayers. Lady Luck like we the Ohio players. You gotta just wake up.
We must be a family, living in harmony. Music's message loud and clear. Peace of mind, oh so
Mathematically putting it down, scientists are sound. Like chord changes switching around, we got the illest sound. Top choice, low rate, no gate, high voice. It's like we dipped the beat in water and now we up on moist.
Ain't got no time for haters, only loved ones. But don't think we up on sweet, you catch them into shove. Speaking this language of music,
bringing harmony.
You're looking at me dirty, thinking of ways of harming me. But
anyway,